Please take you through our welcome statement or with the quotation by Roland Barthes, literature is a question minus the answer. The quotation here is going to be our roadmap for the presentation this afternoon. With literature is a question minus the answer, can simply refer to literature it's very big. Literature is big where you find authors and writers. When they write from their own experiences, from what they see around, and then the prescribed one at school. The intention there is for teachers and learners to read through and to engage, to work out possibly most of the figurative part of literature that the author has brought forth to us as teachers and learners, that we engage fully in it, we discuss, we analyze until we find the literal meaning of what the author wanted to say. Which simply can say there's a common saying that there is no right or wrong answer in literature, which is true. Some of the learners have already found that out, and the teachers, that during the engagement in class, during the reading and analysis, a lot is found from just a paragraph or just a statement, more than what the author could have presented. It is true that indeed in literature, there is no wrong or right answer, as long as the candidate can provide reference or an example from the text that they have read, which is why candidates are always fully encouraged to engage in class through reading or analysis in class so that they can clearly understand and be able to share, especially in examination, where now they have to express their opinions when it comes mostly to open-ended questions. Just to take you through, we're going to look at instruction words, key literary aspects, and question types to expect. All these three aspects will be a guided walkthrough that will help the candidates how to approach paper 2 and make sure that they respond as expected, and then they will ace the paper. Let me now take you through the presentation outline. We have got 3 points that we're going to look at. The first one is key literary aspects. Under key literary aspects, we're going to look at the first one, the main and sub-instructions. The second one, the mark allocation. Next one, extracts provided. And the last one, responding within the given parameters. These are the key literary aspects that I would like us to look at in details so that we know and understand what do they mean, and then also what is expected. The second point under presentation outline will be the question types to expect. Now, this refers to the structure of the paper. Most commonly, the paper, different genres, you will find that these questions are always presented in the question paper. The first one, the mesh column question, they describe time and place, the state of mind, tone, the figure of speech identification, and also relevance of figure of speech, correcting false information, a question on irony, a question on theme, and also on open-ended questions. So these are the questions to be expected that learners can prepare. Learners can learn how to thoroughly respond to these questions. The last one would be additional information of practical tips of how to avoid losing marks. Moving on forward, the first point under key literary aspects, I want us to look at the main and sub-instructions of the paper. This is a very important point. I saw it necessary that we first start with this one, as from the marking experience, we have discovered that learners loses marks unnecessarily, in a sense that they do not follow the instructions. The structure of a paper, the paper is made up of 4 sections. There's section A For novels, there are 2 novels in section A. And then section B, there's drama. There are actually 2 dramas in section B. Section C, there are short stories, extracts from 2 short stories. And then section D, there are also extracts from poems, that is poetry. The most important thing under this aspect is that the candidates are highly encouraged that they remember what the teachers have emphasized in class, that when they get into an examination, they have to consider their table of contents. Very important. The table of content will direct them specifically to which pages that they should go through. These pages would indicate to them the 2 genres that they have done at school. The paper consists of 4 genres, like I have indicated, but the instruction states that the candidates are supposed to respond to only 2 in 2 sections, which means 2 questions. As the question paper is out of 70 marks, and then each question from each section is out of 35 marks. Now, the reason why I felt this is necessary that I share with you, it's that should a candidate chooses question 1 in section A, and they write also question 3 in section B, and then they continue to answer question 5 in section C. The problem is that when instructions are followed, only question 1, we start first, we choose the first question and the second question, which would make that the candidates will only be marked question 1 and question 2 in section B, the first 2 sections. The actual section, section C, which the learner wanted to respond to, will be scratched out, as the learner, a candidate, would not have followed the instructions. That way, it would mean that a learner would be marked and would be given marks out of 35, whereas the paper is total of 70 marks. So it's very important that learners, candidates, before they start writing, they check the checklist. They check the checklist in the question paper where it is indicated that they should tick the appropriate block with the questions that they were supposed to have responded to, and not attempt to answer to even go through the questions of any other genre that they did not look at school. Then the second point under key literary aspect is mark allocation. Here the candidates are just to be advised. This is also very important. It's literature, and candidates need to know that the marks allocated gives a guide at the length of a response that the candidates should provide. For an example, I would say for a question that is allocated 1 mark, according to the taxonomy or the order of questions, those would be the questions that require candidates to either state or mention or identify. And then the questions that will be allocated 2 marks will be the questions that requires candidates to give a description and then also give an explanation where they now give full details to show their knowledge of the text, their understanding and knowledge of the text. Then a question mostly that are allocated 3 marks. It's always a question of a theme. We will see that as we continue now when we look at the theme question and also an open-ended question, where a learner's high order thinking and interpretation is assessed, where now a learner has to give their opinion, which should be paired with reference to the text that is in question. These ones I will explain further when we get to those points. The next point under key literary aspects refers to extracts provided. In a question paper, in candidate's question paper, there is always a question that refers learners to specific questions. I'll make an example. A statement is given or it's taken from an extract. When a statement is taken from an extract, now I will simultaneously explain the 2, responding to refer to lines and then extract provided, before responding to specific lines. The extracts that are provided, this is mostly in novels, drama, and short stories. Before every question 1, which is the novel Cry the Beloved Country will have two extracts. The first extract, and then now followed by the questions. And then the second extract followed by the questions. With the novel, question 1 will be 1.1, and then the second question will be 1.2. And then before the candidates can even attempt to read the extract, it's very important that you look at the information. Look at the information above the extract. Very important. That information is meant to give you an idea of which part of an extract or of a novel or a drama or a short story an extract is taken from the actual text. So that can give you a guide to actually for the candidates to think of possible events before an extract given and then also after an extract given. Now, within a given extract, on the next slide, responding to specific lines. Candidates are encouraged that when you are referred to a specific line, just to make sure that when you respond to that question, you do not consider the text as a whole, either a drama, a short story, a poem, or a novel. They must only respond within the given parameters. Yes, it is allowed to read the specified lines and then read the whole extract to get an idea. But again, before answering, go back again to the specified lines so as to be able to give a direct answer to the question asked. Moving forward now to the second point of my presentation. These are now the question types that candidates can expect. These are the question types that the candidates can expect and also how to respond to the questions. The first one is match columns. With this question, mostly in column A, it will be presented with the names of the characters. And then column B, descriptions. Descriptions or characterization is given. With this one, this will show if the candidates knows their character. The candidates knows their character. Normally, I advise my learners that once we start reading, in their workbook, they have pages where they tabulate in one column where they write the names of the main characters or the characters that appears mostly in the text that you are analyzing. And then they also have a column where they write the names of characters, which we would refer to as the least important characters. And every time as we continue reading, they add on, especially with a novel, every character that appears, and then I would indicate to them where to put it in their table, either under characters that are commonly appearing in the text or in the least character. And then as they read and we analyze, then now they are also advised to write short notes or description of who those characters are and how do they relate with each other, which would make it easy for them when they have to sit and do their revision, to revisit that list so that they also do that to avoid confusing characters, using names of characters of one short story or a novel in another short story. So it's a total, with the match column, it's totalized 4 marks. This now checks if the learners or the candidates really knows their characters. And then the next one is time and place, where we're going to look at how to respond to this question of identifying the setting, but now specifically responding to the question of time and place. Next, it will be a question on state of mind and tone, how to identify a state of mind, and then to give substantiation to the state of mind that has been identified. The next one, we'll go look at the question of a figure of speech, again, identifying a figure of speech and explaining its relevance in the context of the genre that the candidate is responding to. Next one would be how to correct false information. We're also going to look closely at this one, how the candidates can be able to know what is it that is expected of them to respond correctly to this question. And then we also look at the question at the aspect of irony. What is irony? And then also how is this question will be phrased? And then how are candidates expected to respond? The second last one would be a theme question. And then the last one will be an open-ended question. Now, I've already explained the mesh column, that this one will require candidates to fully know their characters, and preferably as they do the tabulation of characters, preferably then now they would have to write the names of the stories, the names of the genre, either a novel, a short story, or a drama. And then for the question of, for the next one, how to respond to a question of describe time and place. First, I think I should explain or try to simplify the word place and time before we can look at an example of how to respond or how is this question phrased, and then how are candidates expected to respond to it. When we read and then we analyze in class, I want to believe that teachers do emphasize that when a question requires candidates to identify a place from an extract given, this question is one of the low order questions where the candidates have to identify the place and the time of the setting. With place, it's not really that a problem. Most candidates do not struggle with answering this one, as the word itself explanatory. It refers to a specific or an exact place mentioned where the event is taking place. What I have picked up is that majority of candidates are struggling to respond to the part or the word time. With time, the candidates have to explain what is happening or who is involved and possibly why, give the reason of what is happening and then who is doing that. Not to indicate, to mention the place and then to say it was during the day or it was in the morning or in the afternoon. That is not what this question requires. But the place, it must be an exact place. For an example, with a story where the story background information, the story would be said that it was set in Ghana. Ghana would not be a relevant or a correct answer to give to a question of place. Johannesburg would not be. Sophia Town as well would not be a relevant or a correct answer to give to a question of a setting of identifying the place and time. But specifically, candidates must say exactly in Johannesburg. I'll make an example with the novel Cry the Beloved Country. In Johannesburg, at Mrs. Ditebe's house, or at the mission house, or in the court. And then in the short stories, now, let us look at an example here. From the short story Triumph at the Face of Adversity on page 159. There is an extract that is given there where a question is asked to the narrator. Are you in school? She asked. Yes, but I did not attend today because I was embarrassed. Embarrassed by what? I broke down and told her the whole story. She held me in her arms. And then now from this extract, a possible question that can be asked is this one. Describe the time and place of the setting above for 2 marks. And then the answer that is expected, the answer would be this: the place is at Ms. Sadike's house. Or some learners or candidates might somehow forget the name of an old woman, and then if they say an old woman that is put inside bracket, the reason why it's put inside bracket is that once a candidate had specifically mentioned an old woman, like it is stated in the text, at least now they can qualify for a mark. That would be where the first mark would be given of the 2 marks. And then the time, like I have explained, it doesn't have to be whether was it in the afternoon or during the day. By the time, the second part of the answer responds to the question of time, that it was when Tulisile was going from house to house to look for a job or food. Then she arrived at her house. That is the time. So this is what I mean when I say that when answering the question of describe time and place, time does not refer to the time, the actual time of the day, but actually what was happening and who was involved. Moving on to the next one on a question of mind, state of mind and tone. When responding to this question, candidates should be taken through a list, possible list or examples of words, common words that they can use, and then on their own, preferably then they are encouraged to use as many sources as possible to find synonyms for the common descriptors of state of mind and tone, so that they can add on to their vocabulary, so that as they reach that, which is normally done also in class, that when we read and analyze, and then I want to believe that some teachers do give these examples. One common factor that I want to emphasize here is that most of the descriptors for state of mind and tone, we find that they are more or less the same. But the important thing is that the candidates have to know the meaning of these descriptors, not to just only give it a wild guess, but know exactly what these descriptors means. That's why I say they also have to invest in themselves to make sure that they look for synonyms for the common ones that we normally use. Now, a state of mind would refer to with a state of mind. It says here, the question would be identify the state of mind of the character and then give a substantiation clearly. What is a state of mind? This can simply refers to a mental attitude of the character, a mental attitude to a character, to possibly what has been said by other characters, what have they done, and then how the one character responds mentally to that. That is a state of mind. And then these are some of the examples. Some characters would feel guilt, hopeful, anxious, nostalgic, empathetic, selfless, confident, and the list continues. Now, to emphasize on this one, I would like us to look at an example given here. An example is taken from the short story entitled Evelyn, with the extract that is given here. She would not cry many tears at leaving the store, but in her new home, in a distant, unknown country, it would not be like that. Now, the question would be, identify the state of mind of Evelyn in the above extract and substantiate your answer. A possible answer would be, Evelyn is in anticipation, hopeful, or expectant. Now, let me just emphasize that this is only done for purpose of explanation. Candidates are not encouraged to give optional answers, but they have to decide on only just one state of mind, which will be credited. That is where the first tick would be. And then the substantiation has to correlate with the state of mind that is mentioned. Evelyn is in anticipation as she is preparing to escape the life she lives with her father and live with Frank. Now, with the knowledge that you already have now, we are aware of the life that Evelyn was living with her father and her siblings after her mother's passing on. Now, Evelyn was involved with Frank, and she was anticipating eloping with Frank. Now, with the state of mind, she was hesitant. She could not really decide whether she should live with Frank or she should honor her mother's promise that after her mother's passing, she would take care of the family. Now, from this extract, if you are asked to identify the figure of speech when she found herself in this state where she was in deep thinking, can be that she was in anticipation, hopeful, and expecting, and then you give the substantiation. Why is it this way? Moving on to the next one for tone. The tone as well, just to emphasize to the candidates that let us not mistake a tone for a pitch of voice. Candidates must not think that when they are asked to identify a tone, then it relates to a pitch of voice or volume to say whether the character's voice was high or low. This one does not refer to that. It actually refers to how the character feels, their emotions. And then that's why I say the descriptors between state of mind and tone are more or less the same. An example, there's an extract where it's taken from the short story Rejection, and it reads thus: he had simply said, don't expect me for lunch. I thought of other absences, quite frequent these days. Mudo uses an affectionate, friendly tone to elicit his wife's trust and hide his secret. Um, sorry for that. With the tone, now here, the question would want the candidate would now have to identify the tone. The question will be identify the tone, Mudo's tone in an extract given. Now the answer is answer that Mudo uses an affectionate or a friendly tone. Why did he do that? To elicit his wife's trust. The extract is taken there where Mudo was busy planning his second marriage to the second wife without his first wife having any knowledge. So at home, when he was trying on different suits and then trying to lose some weight, looking after himself as to prepare, he did it in such an affectionate way, in a friendly way, so that his wife, the narrator, should not be suspicious. So with the answer like this, Mudo uses an affectionate tone. That is where the first tick would be put. And then also the reason, the substantiation would be just to make sure that he still has his wife's trust and hide his secret plan of marrying his second wife. Moving on to the next one. Now, the another question is that of a figure of speech. These are the three other questions to expect in an English file paper 2. A figure of speech, correction of false information, and then that of an irony. A figure of speech by grade 12, it is believed that this should have thoroughly been treated by teachers in the lower grades, but it still needs to be emphasized and practiced thoroughly in class. That figure of speech, it's a way that authors, writers, or poets engage readers into working out literal meaning. Mostly when we read the genres, we find that the writers uses figurative language so that as readers, we can also be engaged. And that's what also allow us thorough analysis so that we can have an understanding. That is why at the end of the day, I said with literature, there's no right or wrong answer. And then everyone can come with their interpretation. But with for assessment purposes, an answer can only be considered if it's grounded fully in the text. Now, with the figure of speech, the common ones that normally would be amongst the answers, it's a simile, which is simply identified where the words as or like is used. And then a metaphor is an implied comparison, which means that all these three, a simile, a metaphor, personification, they're classified under comparison. So a simile is where a comparison is used, and then now you easily identify it where you see the words as or like. And then with a metaphor, it's said to be an implied comparison. where whatever the two things that are being compared, they're actually said. What is actually the main comparison there is said as if it is like that. And then with personification, it was taught in earlier grades that it's where now non-living things are given qualities of giving living qualities. So personification is mostly paired with metaphor. And when we look at, let us look at an extended explanation or an example of a figure of speech. Like I said that the writers or the authors are using figurative language so as to spice up their writing, so as to get us thinking as readers, so that we engage, we share our understanding, and then ultimately we are able to work out the meaning, the hidden meaning, if I can put it that way, the hidden meaning which the author actually intended to do. Now, I worked out an example of a figure of speech. I took it from the short story, The Wind and the Ball, on page 134, with an extract of this statement. Why can't you leave your handbag at home sometimes, Granny? They said. So the question would most probably be this way. Identify the figure of speech in that line. And then the answer there would be a metaphor. Like I have indicated that the candidate has to say specifically which figure of speech is that one. Now, before we go to the question, one thing I also want to emphasize, candidates need to be aware of this. For personification, simile, and a metaphor, like I said, they are classified under comparison. The candidate has to work out before they even attempt answering. The candidate has to work out first, what are the two things that are being compared? And then between the two things that are being compared, they now have to look at a similarity. What is that one quality that these two different things that are compared are now put together, where a comparison is made because of this similar quality? And then they look at the qualities that would match this, the first thing that is compared and the second thing. That is why I say between the two that is compared, there has to be a similarity or a quality that binds them together. So to the question of why can't you leave your handbag at home sometimes, Granny? They said. And then the question was identify the figure of speech. Then they respond a possible response that this is how a possible response that candidates are expected to respond to a question of figures of speech. It's that Friedman is compared to a handbag. That is where now the first tick would go to. Just as a woman would always have her handbag with her and puts valuable things in it, Friedman is always with his grandmother wherever she goes to show the bond they had and how Sejoshe Singh valued her grandson. Just a little bit out of context, which is mostly known that mostly women carry their handbags and they carry them everywhere they go. And you would find that inside the handbag, it's always valuable stuff. From the knowledge of the story, grandmother Sejosine would have her grandson with her everywhere. As it is stated in the story that she thought that Friedman would be the last grandson that she would have. So when other women of the village would ask others to look after their toddlers or to maybe send them somewhere so that they can have time to themselves, grandmother Sejosine did not do that. She always made sure that she had Friedman with her. That is why the women in the village would compare Friedman to a handbag. So this is how this question of a figure of speech can be responded to. Candidates are not to define what a metaphor is, what a simile is, or what personification is, but to work out what are the two things that are being compared, and then what is one quality which now brings some similarity between the two. Moving forward to the next question of correcting false information. There will also be now this question which would be allocated 1 mark, where the candidates will be given a statement with a wrong information. Now, the candidates are encouraged highly to how to respond to this question. They have to spot the wrong fact in the statement given and replace it with the correct information. This one does not require candidates to give an explanation or the reasons why the statement is false, but actually to spot the wrong fact and only correct that. And preferably, not just write the answer of the corrected part of the statement, but the whole statement has to be rewritten with the correct information. For an example here, Friedman's mother worked as a cleaner. Now the candidate's answer would be Friedman's mother worked as a typist. This is what it means. Now, the mistake that most candidates do, they would want to give reasons why the statement is false, or they would want to give their own correct statement, whereas they only just have to spot the wrong fact in the given statement and then replace it with the correct information. And then the next question on irony. The next question on irony. Under irony, candidates would not be required to identify an irony. An ironic statement will always be provided. An ironic statement will always be provided, irrespective of whether the questions are under the novels, drama, short stories, or poems. But an ironic statement is always provided. What the candidates just needs to do is to make sure that they understand and they fully know what is irony. Which simple, we put it simply to say, defining irony, it's a contrast between expectation and reality, which means expectation versus reality. What is expected? It's not actually what is it in reality. Now let us look at an extended example of an irony. An example is taken from the short story Forbidden Love on page 15. The story by now, I want to believe the story is known by now, where we have a story of, which was said during the segregation time, where relationships between different races was forbidden according to the apartheid laws. Now we have the Tabakeng family and then the Randolph family. The Randolph family being the colored family and then Mike's family from the black family. Now, an example of an extract there. Suddenly he heard a voice shouting, "I'll beat up the bloody gaffer." As he swung around, a colored chap caught him by the shoulder and hit him on the mouth, cutting his upper lip. Now, the question that will be posed on this kind of an extract would be explain the irony in Davy beating up Mike for having an affair with his sister. Up to this far, I want to believe that candidates now are fully aware that they must have knowledge of their texts. It can be very dangerous if they only just depend on summaries and do not really know their texts that are prescribed. Because getting an extract like this, suddenly he heard a voice shouting, and you have not read or you do not know your text, then your genre, it means that the candidate would not have any idea who heard the voice, who said the words, and then who is the colored chap, and then also why was there a fight. Now, the answer, the possible answer of possibly how the candidates can be expected to respond to this question of an irony can be that Davy organized his colored friends to go to cinema and beat Mike for having an affair with his sister Dora, Mike being black and Dora colored. Whereas Davy kept it a secret that he also had an affair with Salome, Mike's sister, who is also black, and they have a child together. What makes the statement ironic is that Davy appeared and acted it out that he was against a relationship between blacks and coloreds, whereas he knows he kept a secret from everyone that he once had an affair with a black woman who's Mike's sister, and they have a child together, just that his secret was not known because Salome kept it a secret. So that is why I say candidates should know how to respond to this question and not prepare themselves to identify an irony and explain. An ironic statement would be given. Them is just to provide evidence and fully detailed one to show that they understand a question of an irony. Moving on forward, the second last now questions. These are now the questions which we refer to as the high order questions, the theme question and an open-ended question. With a question of a theme, just like an irony, I've just indicated, an irony, a theme would be provided always. It is also not advisable because we know of the different texts that we use in classes. There are some examples of themes that are presented there. Sometimes learners get hold of study guides and then extended material from websites where themes are provided, and then some learners make a mistake of trying to memorize those themes and how they are explained. What I can say to advise the candidate is that the best thing is to know how to respond to a question of a theme. Once a theme is given, then it also would show if the candidate knows their genre, because you need to know your text. With the question of a theme is provided, and then the candidate has to give full details from the text to support the given theme, to substantiate the given theme. Another thing that I want to emphasize is that candidates are not supposed to negate the theme. I'll explain this thoroughly after the open-ended question because of the instruction word discuss. This is where I see mostly the confusion pops up of the use of the instruction word discussion. Now, with the question of the theme, I've taken an example from the short story, The Girl Who Can. And then the question is, one of the themes in the story, The Girl Who Can, is appreciation. Discuss this theme. Allocated 3 marks. This is the 3 marks that I referred to under mark allocation. This is where the candidate is expected now to show their expertise and their knowledge and interpretation skills of the text. Then the possible answer, this is just a guide of how fully detailed and contextualized your responses should be. The theme is evident when Nana openly appreciates and supports Ajua's achievements, despite her beliefs about her thin legs. When Ajua competes in athletics and wins all her competitions, Nana accompanies her always. When Ajua wins the trophy, Nana puts it on her back like she normally does with her valuable stuff and parades the whole village, then takes it home to show mommy before taking it back to school. She further borrows a charcoal iron from Mr. Menza, their neighbor, to thoroughly prepare Ajua's uniform, which she did not do so before. So going back to the question or the theme that is given appreciation, it has to be clear to the mark. I always say to my learners, from the first question of the low order to the high order, all your answers must be contextualized. That they must not think that they should give their general information or general opinion just because we now have the understanding that there is no right or wrong answer in literature. There must be that evidence in a response of appreciation. background of the story, we know that grandmother, Nana, it's from a matriarchal society where women were in power. And then she is a product of the societal expectation, which did not believe that girls should be educated, which unfortunately she imposed that belief in her daughter, who did not really amount to anything. She did not go to school. She was left in darkness. She could not make any decision. And then she was just on her own. But she had a different idea of her daughter, Ajua, being allowed to go to school, which Nana would always have a problem with Ajua's legs, that they do not look strong enough, as she would not be able to carry the baby. But Ajua proved the societal expectations wrong when she was randomly picked at school, and then she put her thin legs to a good practice. Now, Nana shows appreciation in which way? So the candidates have to say exactly how appreciation is shown. Who shows appreciation? To whom does they show appreciation? And then why is it shown? And then I always say to my learners that when you would decide to give just 1 point as evidence or substantiation, make sure that it is fully grounded in the text and it is detailed. Respond in such a way as if the marker or your teacher does not have any idea of the story, so that when they read your response, they must get all the answers from your response and not ask themselves questions. What is it that possibly you wanted to say? And then the last one, an open-ended question, which is also will be allocated 3 marks, which we regard as a high order question. With this one, I would like to say also to the candidates that do not be misled by the question, do you think, or in your opinion? And then when the candidates respond, then they give their opinion, but then now forgets to give an example or reference where they show reference or they give examples from the text, which would now make sure that they are given the marks that they deserve. With an open-ended question, candidates are now required to consider the whole text as a whole. Unlike the question where you are referred to specific lines or to a specific extract that is given. Now, the candidate has to consider the whole text, which makes it simple, just like a theme question, because now there can be a variety, numerous examples that a candidate can choose from. Those who have read and know their texts. Yes, they can give their opinion, but remember, it must be fully granted in the text. And then one most important point before we can move on to an extended example. Candidates are also encouraged to please make sure that before you give your response to an open-ended question, indicate with a yes or no before your substantiation. Sometimes it does happen that candidates somehow forget to indicate yes or no response to the statement give or to the question posed. And then when we read the substantiation and then we feel but it is too neutral, the marker cannot really say whether is the statement for yes or for no. The other problem that candidates need to do, the importance of proofreading. After you have written your response, it is always encouraged that you reread your answer, because sometimes it happens that the candidate would respond with a yes, but now the substantiation will be that for a no. And unfortunately, in that way, again, it also puts you in a position where the candidate might lose marks. And then sometimes I do get questions in my class where learners would want to know that, ma'am, what if I want to answer partially to the question? I want to give some substantiation for the yes and also for the no. Is it allowed? Yes, it is acceptable. It is acceptable. It's just that candidates need to be careful of those. When you give a partial answer to an open-ended question, just make sure that you use the conjunction "and," so that when the marker reads your answer, then they are aware that they should read both the yes and the no. In case that the yes part is not convincing or the no part is not convincing, at least the one that is convincing should be considered, and then the candidate can be awarded marks for that. Unlike if the candidate would have given an option or, then it means the first one can be taken. If it's wrong, then the candidates would lose marks. Now let us look at an extended example of an open-ended question and then the possible answer. This one was taken from a short story, Last Act, where the question or the statement reads thus: the narrator is to be pitied, and then discuss your view. For possible answers for yes, I have tabulated 3 points. I will explain the bullets afterwards. The first one reads thus: the narrator deserves to be respected as she handled the bullying from school in a matured way by not reporting Renato and her other classmates. She was only 12 years old and new at school, but tried to find ways to solve the problems she faced by herself without reporting to her teacher for assistance. The third point, she also took the teasing from her aunt in a decent manner as a joke and did not tell her mother about those jokes or what was happening at school. Let us go to the no question, and then I would emphasize on the bullets like I've just indicated. For those who would decide to answer a no to this question, the first bullet reads thus: she does not deserve to be respected, as she was supposed to have reported her classmates for bullying. The second point, she should have reported the bullying to her mother so that her mother reports it to the headmaster, as the teacher also did not rescue her. The last point, she gives in to be mocked and would rather wear the long tunic to avoid prolonged teasing. Now, when you look at these bullets, these responses would not be enough for 3 marks. Now, this is a tip to mostly the learners or the candidates who also uses past papers marking guidelines. The possible answers appears like this. I refer to this as summarized version. So it might happen sometimes that, yes, they are contextualized, but you find that some information is left out. They do not give out all the details. Let's go to the yes option, the first bullet. The narrator deserves to be respected as she handled the bullying from school in a matured way by not reporting Renato and her classmate. Now, for a candidate can take the first bullet and then elaborate more. What kind of bullying did she experience? Who bullied her? And then how did it make her feel? To also incorporate it with the second one, as she was only just 12 years, just in her puberty years, in a new school where she did not know what to expect, and then all the loopholes there, the candidates need to fill them in. So just be aware that when you're using past papers marking guidelines, these are just but summarized versions of the possible answers that there it's given to the markers. The candidates are expected to give full substantiation with details. That is why all the questions would be that is the marking guidelines would always give a note information that a candidate can score 1 to 2 or 3 marks once the answers are fully grounded in the text. So those candidates who would use previous papers marking guidelines, just be guided on that one, that when you come to the responses, your responses must be fully detailed. The marker should not ask themselves questions of what kind of bullying, who was being bullied, and then what did they do for it to be labeled bullied. And also, the last one, she took in the teasing from her aunt in a decent manner. State exactly what is it that her aunt said. Whereas we knew the aunt did not mean to mock her, but because she was already experiencing bullying at school, that is why she did not take it as a joke. Say what is it that the joke, what is it that the aunt said, which you would now explain thoroughly to the yes option. Now, before we can go to additional information, I did indicate that I would like us to look at the instruction word discuss. Now, there seemed to be a misunderstanding when it comes to this question, discuss. When a question of a theme is asked, the last phrase there is discuss this theme. And then an open-ended question, the phrase is discuss your view. Now, just a bit out of context, when we look at the instruction word discuss in discursive essay, candidates are encouraged and are reminded that that is supposed to be an essay that looks at two different sides or opposing sides. Now, what I want to emphasize here is that candidates must not think that the instruction would discuss this thing and discuss your view are the same in literature. In literature, like I've said, when the phrase says discuss this thing, it means you have got no choice. You have to agree with the given theme and provide evidence from the text and contextualize all your answers. In an open-ended question, that is when now you are allowed to say, yes, you agree with the statement or you disagree with the statement. So let us just be careful not to confuse or think that the instruction word discuss means the same thing in both the theme question and the open-ended question. Remember, a theme is given, you are not to negate it, but you have to provide just only evidence, fully detailed, grounded, text grounded one, and then only in open-ended, then you can share your opinion, which should be paired by examples or reference from the text, not general knowledge. Now, coming to the last point on additional information. We have got 4 points to look at. The first one is knowing your text. The second one, distinguishing your characters. The third one, using names and not pronouns. And the last one, proofread properly. With the first one, know your text. Sometimes there might be or there are tendencies that candidates would want to trust the summaries more than the actual texts. Candidates are, I would say the word discouraged, because I have seen that it is not doing some of the candidates any good. That they must be careful that when they respond to questions or when they prepare for examinations, they have to have read and analyzed their texts thoroughly so. That is why candidates are encouraged to be fully involved, engaged in the reading and analysis of text in the classrooms and not base their knowledge on summaries or performances or sometimes films. Others chooses to watch films and then go to theaters to watch performance, and then they think that they have enough knowledge to sit. The problem with this is that when you sit for examinations, the extracts that you have to respond to in question papers are from the extracts are from the text that were studied. So if the candidates have studied the summaries, then it would mean that they would struggle to answer possibly all the answers. As some of the, like for example, the short stories, some of the short stories are extracts from the novels. So when they read summaries, they might bring in some information that is not in the prescribed text that was used in class. With the distinguishing of your characters, I mentioned when I explained the question on match column that candidates must know their characters. We have also picked up that a lot of candidates, especially when it comes to the story of triumph at the face of adversity, we have the two characters, who is Tembekile, who's the mother, and Tulisile, the daughter. Candidates are confusing the two names, and that leads to a very frightening loss of marks. For an example, a question of a theme would be about Tembekile, and then the candidate would give all the good positive points about Tulisile, whereas they are responding about Tembekile. And unfortunately, if the character name is wrong, then marks cannot be allocated. So the tabulation of the characters can help in this regard. I tell them every time, anytime they get a chance, they must revise it to know their characters by heart and also to identify them to respective stories. The same with the story Triumph at the Face of Adversity. I always say to the learners, when I do also revision, I make sure that I revise these stories simultaneously, because somehow there are similarities between the two stories, between Evelyn and Triumph at the Face of Adversity. In that way, some learners respond in Triumph at the Face of Adversity with information from Evelyn's story, and they do vice versa. So when you do your revision and preparation for your examination, make sure that after you have revised all your stories with these two, make sure that you do the revision simultaneously, and then if possible, write down the differences so that you be able to distinguish between the two. The second last one, the use of names and not pronouns. Candidates are also highly, yes, in paper 2 when we mark, we do not penalize learners for the wrong use of pronouns. But remember, this is English. So every time, even when responding in class, when you're doing your peer discussions, peer assessment, normalize using character names. Normalize using character names, and then to avoid using wrong names and then also wrong pronouns. For an example, you'll find some learners would say grandmother Sijosini, but as they continue with their explanation, then they would rather use the pronoun he instead of the correct one, she, as she's a woman. The last one, proofreading. The paper, it's allocated 2.5 hours. It was 2 hours before, and it was noticed that majority of learners could not finish it in 2 hours. Now, an extra 30 minutes has been added. It allows enough time for learners to contextualize their work and to also go and start from the first question to proofread their work once they have finished writing, to be able to correct mistakes. Just be careful that in English, writing with a pencil is highly not acceptable. It is regarded as an irregularity. With the very same pen that the candidate is writing with, the candidate is highly encouraged to do the corrections with that. And please do the proofreading, as it is important. That is where some candidates would now be able to be aware that with their characters, somehow they have confused the characters. Now, these are just but addition of instruction words. We can go through this. Very important. I tried to show what does describe mean, where you only just give facts based on the text that you are responding to, describe to time and place from an extract, and then now explain, that will be the 2 marks, where now you give it the details or the facts or the reason, and in your own words. This one now requires your interpretation and understanding and not paraphrasing. Now the last one on additional. Always contextualize from the first question. And when responding to open-ended question, do not question the examiner, but ask the questions asked. And in closing, I would like to say The more you read, the more things you will know. The more that you learn, the more places you'll visit. By Dr. Seuss.
That's true.
Read your genres and know them by heart. Because of
That's
the
true.
questions, all the questions that are asked, then they are from your genres and not from your knowledge. Read them as often as possible. Thank you.